Okay, Bridge to Home. We've got our buddy back there from who is heading up part of this. A little bit of history. The Bridge to Home is formerly the Santa Cruz Valley Emergency Winter Shelter. Its locations in 97, 98, it was in the Merle Norman building on Centerpoint Parkway. In 99 and 2000, it moved to the lot next to the Activity Center when those buildings were now then being renovated to become the Activity Center. And then probably the thing that made it the most visible is when they moved to the Villa Princesa Metrolink station in 2001 and 2002. As you recall, we had numerous homeowners, especially in the Vista del Canyon area, that were severely impacted. They came back and asked to stay one more year, and they stayed in 2003. And then they moved on in 4, 5, and 6 to the LA County Department of Public Works yard. And then we're going to talk about how they then moved in 7, 8, and 9 to the city-owned property on Golden Valley Road, and to the now currently for the 10, 11, 12 time frame for the city-owned property on Drayton Street. And then they were scheduled to move in 13, 14, 15 to the Los Angeles County Prisoners parking lot in Castaic. And so the way the locations were determined was originally they had a homeless advisory task force that Frank Ferry headed up, and they were kind of unsuccessful in determining a location. And then what happened was there was discussions about the shelter being in the Villa Princesa parking lot, and the county went up to Castaic to talk about moving it up there. Castaic Town Council said, we don't want it there, and they released information saying it was going to go back to Villa Princesa. And I called into the county office and said, wait a minute, if you're talking to residents in Castaic, why aren't you talking to residents here? And their answer was, well, you're represented by the city. And my comment to them was, aren't we still constituents of LA County? And they thought about it, and Paul Novak came down, met with us, and talked about forming the homeless shelter task force around the 2006-2007 time frame. Now, he put this thing together, and it was absolutely brilliant. I mean, the guy was just, as far as I'm concerned, he really had his act together when he did this, because instead of saying to us, where can you put a homeless shelter? He did it the opposite way, and then we vote on it so that there's winners and losers. He did it the other way. He said, where can't you put a homeless shelter? So everybody around the room said, oh, well, you can't put it next to a school. Oh, you can't put it on a route to school. Oh, you can't put it next to here. You can't put it there. And they took down all this information, and then they sent out a crew of guys, a subcommittee of ladies and gentlemen, and they picked locations that didn't violate any of that criteria. So when they came back to the group, they said, here is 4 locations. It doesn't violate any of the criteria that you said. These have to be good locations, right? And everybody shook their head. Yeah, oh, absolutely, yeah, sure. So they had a consensus. They took those 4 potential locations to the council, and the council reduced those locations to 3, and then accepted a plan to locate the shelter 3 years at each location. And that's how it started out on Golden Valley, and then it moved to Drayton, where it currently is, and then it's scheduled to move again. And now, a little evolution in the homeless shelter issue. They have a new board, and they've renamed themselves the Bridge to Home. And Hunt Brawley put together a task force to look at where they thought the best place would be for the shelter currently. And they have a proposal to stay at Drayton Street for an additional 3 years. And that's what they're looking to do. So Bridge to Home is going to be going to the Santa Cruz City Council to propose remaining at Drayton for 3 more years. And I've got to tell you that when I walked in the room, my initial impression was, you made a deal, follow it. You know, do what you're supposed to do. There are some good, compelling reasons why they shouldn't move. And I thought it was very interesting that they really don't service much of CCAC. This really is more all located within the city. And Drayton is kind of in the center of the city. And it was pretty obvious from the comments made by the people from the Castaic Town Council. They didn't want them up there either. So they're going to make this proposal to remain at Drayton for 3 more years, endorse the continued expansion of their services, and convene the task force on a periodic basis to assess the operation at Drayton. Now, the council is going to have some options. I mean, they actually have more than 2, and that's part of my concern. One is they could allow the shelter to remain at Drayton. They can say, you know what, we got that property there, good place, stay. Or they can insist that it moves per plan. And I think if they insist it moves per plan, the county will go right along with it. My fear is that if they push too hard and they maybe don't move for a year and they no longer have an agreement, they may end up with no place to go. So we need to make sure that that doesn't happen. Bridge to Home needs to establish and implement a plan for a permanent shelter. A year-round permanent deep shelter overlay zone was established where the shelter could be permitted by right. There was a law at the state level that said you needed to do that. Every municipality needed to do that. When Lori Ender was the mayor at the beginning of her mayoral term, she called the Homeless Shelter Task Force back together. Lisa Weber produced maps and overlays for existing zones that showed places where the shelter could be placed that did not violate any of the homeless shelter requirements. So, of course, you know, how can you refuse? And that was the intent of providing 9 years for a temporary location, was for them to be able to go ahead and find a permanent place to reside. So that's what's happening with that. Hunt, did you have anything to add?
Only if there's any questions.
Is there any questions? Yes.
What would be the objection to them staying?
What would be the objection to them staying? Well, I don't know. Part of that were questions I got asked and really didn't get answered. One was, does the city, right now they're sitting on a piece of city-owned property. Does the city have any imminent use for that property? Well, wait a minute. You know, we got to ask the city that. I can't answer that. You can't answer that. The city's got to answer that, right? Is there any reason for them to do that? Should they, if they made that agreement, should they be compelled to stand up to that agreement? I don't know. We'll have to wait. We'll have to wait to see what the city says. I don't know what the city's going to say. Hunt, did you want to say something?
Yeah, let me just answer that question because it was brought up at the task force. Again, I'm Hunt Brawley. I'm the chairman of the board of Bridge to Home, which is the nonprofit that runs the shelter. And I appreciate Alan serving on the advisory committee that was reconvened and reconstituted this year. We met in December, had a good discussion. There were 3 issues that the task force asked more information, and it came back at our meeting 2 weeks ago. One was, what do the adjacent property owners say? So we did a survey of 9 adjacent property owners. You may know Blue Barrel Disposal's right across the street from us. Of the 9 adjacent property owners, I think 6 contribute or provide donations to the shelter. None of them had any issues with the shelters. A couple of them even wanted to know where the shelter was. So that didn't seem to be an issue. The second, what is the cost of moving it up to Castaic? And it's about $180,000 to $200,000. The shelter facility has expanded since it moved from Golden Valley. 3 mobile modular units are now 6. There's more services. So that was the second issue. The third issue was crime. The city got statistics from the Sheriff's Department, what it was before the shelter, then the first year and the second year of the shelter. There's been a spike in calls. but it's unknown exactly what has caused that or where those are coming from. That wasn't in the statistics. And the first year, there was an increase in what they call Class 1 crimes. I think 5 to 13, something like that. The second year, though, it was back down to 5, and in fact, it was really only 4, because one of the 5 was a referral for a 72-hour hold, and that's not a crime. And one of the reasons or explanation from our executive director was most likely the first year when people came to the shelter at that location, we have very clear rules. No weapons, no drugs, no alcohol, none of that can come in. And so you have clearly some people who try to come in and they have those issues, they won't give them up. And most likely a significant number of those calls were from the shelter staff saying we have an issue here, we have some people here. Second year, you have the shelter there. Quite candidly, the homeless who want to take advantage of the service, they know what the rules are. They come and take advantage of the service. Those who don't want to, they're somewhere else in the valley. The city staff is still recommending that we move. Their position is a deal's a deal. We think we've made compelling arguments as to why Drayton being centrally located, the cost of moving, that's where our services, it's a good location, public transportation, all kinds of reasons, the type of businesses around us. So we will be recommending, again, to the City Council, hopefully in February. The task force was supportive of us doing that and supported unanimously, and it's a group of citizens like Alan, school districts, town councils, Chamber of Commerce, VIA, so a broad-based group. And so hopefully it will continue that support in February. The one thing which I totally agree with Alan on, which is something I've only been on the board now 2 years, is we must find a permanent location. Drayton may or may not be a permanent location. It is city-owned land, but there is some potential future development of the Saugus industrial site where there's some potentiality the MRF may go there. There may be some issues with us staying there any type of permanent basis. Bridge to Home and the community has to decide where is the location for this facility, how do we make it work for the community and for the people who need this service, and we agree with that. And that's something that we are making a commitment to, and we're going to keep the task force going, not to advise us on Drayton, but basically to be part of the advisory team on where do we go and how do we make it permanent. If not Drayton, where? So hopefully that helps a little bit. Thank you.
Okay, so we'll have to wait and see when that happens in February.